Good morning. This is Simone Detling from the UNFI Secretariat here in Geneva. Thank you very much for joining us this morning for our webinar on the final principles for responsible banking and their framework documents, which we have released this week, Monday. Today, for you, our members, we will go through these principles and the framework documents. We will talk a little bit about next steps and also recap the process to date. I am joined by three of the banks that have led the development of these principles. So we will have with us Nathalie Jobert from BNP Paribas. She will be presenting the final principles. We will have with us Dimitrios Dimopoulos from Piraeus Bank, who will present to you the key steps to be implemented by signatories. And we have Radoslav Georgiev from ING, and he will be talking you through the reporting and self-assessment template. You see in a few agenda items, we have lots of time for Q&A because that's really the rationale for this webinar, for you to be able to interact with your peer banks, to ask lots of questions. So please don't hesitate, do come in. In terms of how that works, for those of you who have joined our webinars before, I think it might be quite clear, but for those of you who haven't, there are two options. You can either put a question into the question box, and then we'll see that and we'll read it out. Or you can raise your hand in the system, and then we'll unmute you, and you can ask your question directly or have a discussion with one of the banks or all of them that are presenting. So please feel free to come in and participate as much as possible. For those of you who might be joining us via dial-in, we will be sharing the slides in just a second, so you can follow offline. Okay, fantastic. With that, let's get started. The first part we will cover here from the Secretariat today, why and how the principles were developed. So a little bit of a recap of this process. Towards the end of 2017, the UNFI member banks, have expressed the demand to develop principles for responsible banking. So to develop a framework that can guide the banking industry and UNFI's members into a new era of sustainable banking, of responsible banking, an era where the banking sector is clearly seen to be contributing substantially to achieving global and local goals around sustainable environmental, social, and economic development. Following that, your banking governance body, the Banking Committee, has given a mandate to start the development of the principles at the beginning of 2018. And then last year, April, a core group of 30 banks has come together for the first time in London to, on your behalf and in consultation with you, develop the principles for responsible banking. They've also constituted and engaged with an advisory group of 13 civil society institutions in their development of the principles. Many of you might recall last year, July, August, we had a membership consultation with all of you on the first draft of the principles. Over 70% of UNFI member banks participated. So really fantastic inputs, lots of feedback that helped the core group to further develop these principles until November last year, when the draft principles for responsible banking were launched for global public consultation by the core group bank CEOs at the UNFI Global Roundtable in Paris. I think many of you were there in person. Here, real quick, the core group of banks, and it's truly a global group from all continents of the world: North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia. And it's banks with very different business models and of very different sizes. So truly representative, and with that, a fantastic group to develop a globally valid framework that is designed to be adapted to local context by each bank, but we will get into the detail on that. We ended the 6-month global public consultation on 31st of May this year. All the feedback and the responses are published. You can access them on our website. More than 250 banks worldwide participated in this consultation, and in total more than 500 stakeholders, including lots of civil society. We had 17 webinars, we had 36 live meetings in 34 countries, over 70 submissions in the online system. So it was truly an enormous effort, but also really input and conversations around the world. And so this Monday, following revisions after the global public consultation inputs, we have released the final principles for responsible banking and their framework documents. And the grand finale, before we start implementation, of course, will be on 22nd and 23rd September in New York, when we will have the signing and launch of the principles for responsible banking. And we'll be talking a bit more about the details of that in the next steps. What will these principles achieve? And this is really something that we've defined together with all of you. Their purpose is to transform the banking industry, to enable it to play a leading role in achieving society's goals. The vision is a responsible banking industry that is and remains an integral part of the society in the 21st century, because it serves and contributes to an inclusive society that uses its natural resources sustainably. And our mission is, well, for all of you to take a leadership role and use your product, services, and relationships to support and accelerate the fundamental changes that we need in our economies and lifestyles to achieve shared prosperity for both current and future generations. The principles do benefit, of course, society, but also signatory banks, because they provide you with one comprehensive framework for effectively responding to our changing economy and society across your bank's entire business, at the strategic level, at the portfolio, and at the transaction level. So this is really the first framework that elevates sustainability all the way to the strategic level. And we'll see this more in detail in the principles. They benefit your bank by enabling you to seize new business opportunities created by the emerging sustainable economy, by the economic changes we're seeing with the green transformation, by the social changes we're seeing, by the emergence of a new generation, the millennials, while at the same time enabling you to effectively identify and address related risks, which is, of course, at the core of what banks do. They benefit your bank as a signatory by strengthening trust, ensuring that it doesn't only remain competitive and relevant in the new era, but increases its value to those that it serves by demonstrating alignment with society's goals. And with that, you'll be able to respond effectively to the evolving needs and ever-rising expectations of clients, of regulators, of investors, of civil society. I think the pressure and the expectations have been rising massively in the last years. And of course, it provides all of you with direct access to expert knowledge, to tools, to resources, helps you strengthening your bank's positioning and capacities within the context of a changing economy and society. The key features of the principles, once again, it's one framework for your whole bank. It elevates sustainability to the strategic level and filters through to the portfolio level and to the transaction level. It drives your alignment with society's goals as they've been expressed in the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals, the global framework that all parts of society are now working towards. Target setting is the key mechanism to drive ambition and progress where it matters most, and we'll get into a lot of detail on that. Transparency and accountability, of course, through reporting and review. Also, and that we'll get into details. And it's a global framework that has global validity. It's applicable for banks in any context, but it allows you to really apply this to local priorities and to your own bank's business models and strengths. and we will see that in the course of the presentation as well. With that, I will be handing over to Nathalie Chaubert from BNP Paribas. She will run you through the final principles. We'll go on after that to Demetrios from Piraeus to talk about the key steps, the key to-dos for Signatory Banks. And after that, we'll be pausing for a Q&A. And already feel free now to start putting your questions into the questions box, or to raise your hand, so we're ready to go for that Q&A. For now, I'll be handing over to you, Nathalie, for the principles themselves. I'll be moving the slides for you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to be with you this morning to present the final document and the result of a long and very interesting process among banks. So the principle of responsible banking are, in fact, 6 principles that we will detail just a bit later. The first one is alignment, second one, impact and target setting, client, customer, stakeholder, governance and culture, transparency and accountability. For those who have been following this exercise from the beginning, you will recognize basically all the words with some slight changes. We can maybe go into detail of what has changed since the beginning. Once again, not much in the global view, but some things in the preamble. So now it includes a reference to the bank's ability to remain profitable, which is, of course, very important for all of us. And it also reinforced the social and human rights aspect, because it was the environmental and climate issues were very clear in the first principle. So now the idea is to have something with really both social and environmental aspects. It also clarified that the principle set out ambition to work toward and not to be a standard that we can fulfill. So that's really this idea that we will once again find later on about setting a target and working towards this target. The principle, everything was which was related to impact and target setting are now in principle 2. It used to be in 3 different principles before, 1, 2, and 5. But once again, you will probably find the same idea, but presented, we hope, in a clearer way. So maybe we can go a bit more into the principles themselves. The first principle is alignment. And the idea is really that our strategy as a bank should be consistent with the needs and goals of the society. And those can be expressed either in the Sustainable Development Goals, in the Paris Climate Agreement, or in any framework which is applicable in our countries. This is key because, as expressed earlier, the purpose is really to have both a profitable bank, but a bank which serve those goals and serve our clients. The second principle, the second principle is about impact and target setting. So this is something which exists since the very beginning of the principle, this idea of identifying where our impact are. And once again, we really wanted to stress that our products and services can have both positive and negative impact, and we acknowledge that. But the purpose is really to increase our positive impact as much as possible and to reduce our negative impact. The objective of this impact management is, of course, to manage the risk for the bank, but also for the people and from the environment. So it's really about the idea of what impact our product and services have on people. How we will do that? We will define targets, set them, publish them, and the idea is really to define those targets where we have the most significant impact. And this is an exercise which is really key. It's an exercise that we did not only for the principles within BNP Paribas, but trying to assess really where your impact are, positive and negative, is, from my experience, both very interesting and very important to then set target and discuss with our management. If we move to principle 3, clients and customer, of course, the idea is that we won't do that by ourselves. It's really to work with our clients and customers. And the end purpose is really to encourage sustainable practices and enable activities that would create shared prosperity. And we find again this idea for current and future generation, so including both social and environmental impacts. Stakeholder, this is something which has been applied throughout the work we have been doing with banks by rating those principles, but it's something that we also have to do within our bank. So we acknowledge that we will proactively consult, engage, and partner with relevant stakeholders, keeping in mind that we still have the same purpose, which is to achieve the society's goal, which were defined at the very beginning of those PRDs. Fifth principle is governance and culture. Principles do not stand on themselves. They need to be really rooted in a good governance and a culture of responsible banking. So the idea is really to put in place everything which is the bank, which will make this governance and culture possible. And sixth principle, also very important, to make them real and trustful, transparency and accountability. First, we will periodically review our principle and implementation. And the purpose of that is to be transparent and accountable for both positive and negative impact. So we go back to the idea that we developed at the very beginning. The purpose is not to say that everything is perfect, it's going smoothly. It's also to be transparent about what is going well and what is more difficult in our contribution to society's goal, and this transparency and accountability will probably be the pillars which will make the principle live and trustful in the coming years.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that to Nathalie Chabert in Paris. Nathalie, it's going to be 42 degrees today. So global warming live. Let me open up maybe to the audience for a minute for any questions or comments at this point, while Dimitrios, you're getting ready for the presentations on the key steps to be implemented by signatories. But to the audience, are there any questions or comments at this point that you would have on the process of the principles so far, their purpose, their value proposition to you, and the principles themselves? Once again, you can type questions into the questions box, or you can raise your hand and we'll be happy to unmute you. Okay, I think for now people are good. Then let's move into the more granular details of the principles, the to-dos for signatory banks. Dimitrios, I would be handing over to you for that.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you, everybody. I hope that you will enjoy the next couple of minutes as we walk through the steps that need to be implemented by signatories. So if a bank decides to sign up to these principles and wants to ensure that it will have an effective implementation of these principles, it will have to follow these three key steps, which will continuously help the bank to improve its impact and to contribute to society. Namely, these steps are: step 1, impact analysis; step 2, target setting and implementation; and step 3, reporting and being accountable. We will dive into these three steps in the next slides, but before we do that, we'll move on to what is the time frame for implementing the principles. As banks start from different, let's say, embark on this journey from different starting points, the principles have allocated a period of time where banks can prepare to, and set their targets and start working on implementing them. Everything starts on day 1, and that is the day the bank becomes a signatory to the principles of responsible banking, and of course becomes a member of UNEP FI, which is very important because that will help the bank to share with a community of hundreds of banks around the world the experience of becoming implementing the principles and supporting sustainable economies. The next major milestone is the reporting the first reporting, and that will have to be done within the first 18 months of becoming a signatory. And once you have released your first report, from thereafter, you are required to do that on an annual basis. So it is very, very important that banks, following the principles that we just mentioned before, and specifically Principle 6, will have to report their progress on how they're meeting their targets, how they are impacting positively the economy, society, and how they're meeting the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. Setting targets and being ready to setting the internal infrastructure that is needed to implement the principles, the banks will have the maximum 4 years time to do so. Of course, the sooner the banks set their targets and start working on implementing them, the better it would be to acquire the experience that is needed and to be able to achieve what they want to achieve through implementing the principles. So banks have a 4-year time period to set targets and make sure that they're on track implementing them. In the meantime, their first milestone is to report within the first 18 months.
Demetrius, are you still with us?
Can you hear me? Sorry, have you?
Now we hear you again. Yes.
I think accidentally I pushed a little button. So back to step one. Step one, which refers to impact analysis. This requires banks to analyze and to map their significant positive and negative impacts they have on society, on the environment, and on the economy. Then the banks will have to identify where they have the greatest positive impacts, and of course, try to improve and increase their positive impacts while at the same time reduce significant negative impacts. When you want to do this impact analysis, you'll have to keep in mind the following. First, you must cover all your core business areas. And in order to do so, you will have to take into account the following elements. Element 1, the scale of your bank's activities with regards to specific industries, technologies, and geographies. So if you're a bank that is operating in various countries, you will have to take that into consideration. If you're a bank that you are exposed to different and specific industries or technologies, you will have to definitely take that into consideration. The second element is context. That means the most relevant challenges and priorities related to sustainable development in the countries or regions in which your bank operates. As you understand, each country or each region has its own priorities in how it will develop in a sustainable manner. These will have to be taken into consideration when you're doing your impact analysis. And the third element is the scale and intensity / salience of the social, economic, and environmental impacts identified. And of course, how urgent these impacts are in the areas, in the countries, in the regions you're working in. And based on this analysis, once you're finished doing the analysis, you have to identify strategic business opportunities and increase your positive while at the same time decrease your negative impacts. And this is very important. This is the crux of the principles, that we have a holistic approach towards impacts. Increase impacts on the one side, but also decrease impacts on the other side. And of course, in order to achieve your impact analysis, it is very important that you work very closely with your stakeholders. Let's move on to step 2. This is the step where you set targets and you start implementing them. You set SMART targets that address the significant impacts of your bank that you have identified, and you work towards achieving them. Now, in order to set SMART targets, you have to keep in mind that it is required that a bank will have to set and publish ambitious targets. Minimum of 2 targets. A bank has to set at least 2 targets that address at least 2 of your bank's most significant potential positive and negative impacts. And you have to make sure that these targets align your efforts with the appropriate sustainable development goals and the Paris Agreement goals, and also with the relevant national frameworks. And of course, if you want to be successful with setting targets and most of all, implementing your targets, these will have to be specific, measurable, either in quantitative or in qualitative terms, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, hence the initials SMART. So your targets will have to be very smart, and to do so, you have to work in a very smart way. Implement the targets that we set. It is very important that we set milestones, we define and implement actions to meet these targets. And of course, we have to measure and monitor progress and put in place governance and oversight structure. It is very important when you're starting your journey on implementing the principles that you have the right oversight structure within your bank and also the right structure that will be implementing, because these principles touch upon all businesses within the bank. It's not only the core business in terms of, like how you deal with your customers or your clients. It all has to do with how you deal with your, with all the stakeholders, employees included as well. And you will have to set targets and implement actions that touch upon all 6 principles, not just the 2 major, at least, targets that you will have set in the beginning. And then we'll move on to step number 3, which is the final step, and it refers to the accountability. Now, banks are required through their existing reporting. We do not want to create different reporting templates or different reporting requirements to describe how your bank is implementing the principles for responsible banking, to provide an assured assessment of the progress that your bank is making. It is very, very important that when the banks are ready and start reporting, that they do assure how they actually make their progress. What do we keep in mind during this stage, this step? Transparency and reporting. We have to report on how we are implementing the principles for responsible banking, the targets that we have set, and the progress that we make. We have to be transparent about our significant impacts, both positive and negative, and how we contribute to the society's goals. There's no need to produce an additional report for the principles for responsible banking. It is very important that we do follow a template, a self-reporting template, but all this is required as information to be included in your existing public reporting. As I mentioned before, there is a self-assessment and assurance process. You provide self-assessment for your progress, and you do that by following the reporting and self-assessment template we'll be talking about later on. And your assurer needs to provide limited assurance of your self-assessment. So this wraps up the 3 steps that are very, very important to follow in implementing the principles. I thank you, and I hand it over back to Simone.
Thank you very much, Dimitrios, for his fantastic presentation. I think quite a bit to digest, but I think also very clear steps, very clear to-dos for banks, very clear guidance on how to go about implementing the principles, how to set up the structures, the mechanisms to ensure your bank's aligning with society's goals and to drive this alignment in practical terms and steps. So I am giving it back to the audience for questions, comments, views. Please do either raise your hand or put your questions into the questions box. The 3 banks here, BNP, ING, Piraeus, are here, to answer your questions, to have discussions with you, to receive your feedback and views. So please do take them up on this opportunity. Okay, I think, Demetrius, for now, you've been very, very clear. Well done. And I think we will move on to the last part of the framework, which is the reporting and self-assessment template. And then after that, we'll really open up for Q&A, get into the discussion. So please put in any questions you have, or just raise your hands if you have comments, if you have views on this, if you want to engage with the banks. For now, I'll be handing to Rado from ING for the reporting and self-assessment template. We will switch here to the actual document. For those of you who are following offline, if you just go to the Principles for Responsible Banking homepage, you will find this document on the landing page as well. I am putting it up here for everybody to see who's in the webinar system. So it should be large enough. Let me just check. I'll make it a little bit larger. And with that, I would hand over to Rado from ING for walking you through how this will work in practice. Rado, over to you.
Thanks, Simone. Good morning, everyone. So I'd like to start, before we go into the actual template, I'd like to just mention a few key aspects that guided us in developing the template. And again, reiterate the fact that this template was not created only by the banks in the core group or the task team developing the template, but also in consultation with key stakeholders who will be involved in reporting processes and ensuring transparency around the principles. We've consulted assurance providers, non-member banks, and other stakeholders who may have a view on this. And guiding us in developing the template were a few principles, of course. We, as mentioned earlier in the webinar, we wanted to address transparency. So we want to make sure that banks' performance, including positive and negative impacts, Nathalie also mentioned around impact analysis, a really interesting area, and a process that can help you identify positive and negative impact opportunities. So we wanted to make sure that transparency is key to performance on the principles. We wanted to ensure credibility. We wanted to make sure that the principles are seen as a credible framework. And so we introduced the requirement of assurance. And we wanted to make sure that progress can be tracked over time. So this is where the annual self-assessment template really helps to show how each bank is improving over time in the process of alignment with the principles. Now, if we look at the template, I think it's important also to note, it was mentioned already that banks are expected to disclose such a self-assessment document or a template within 18 months of signing the principles. However, that doesn't mean that we expect banks to be aligned within 18 months. On the contrary, we understand that this process is a continuous improvement process, and so banks have up to 4 years to align with the principles. However, each year we expect banks to identify these improvement areas and to show progress in these areas. And as Demetrius mentioned, we're not asking you to produce a separate report, but really to organize your disclosures or actually references to existing disclosures, that these references be made in this template under the principles and requirements of the principles. So the template covers 6 self-assessment areas. These are impact analysis, target setting, plans for target implementation and monitoring, progress on implementing targets, governance structures for the implementation of the principles, and progress on the implementation of the principles. There are several aspects of bank responses that we want to be covered in the scope of limited assurance. As I mentioned, we want to make sure that this framework is seen as credible, that we ensure that there's some sort of accountability. So we see a third-party assurance as a way to really prove that. These areas are impact analysis, target setting, governance and culture, transparency, and accountability. So we ask banks to cover their statements in the template in those areas with limited assurance. And we also ask banks to provide an overall conclusion or statement on whether they fulfilled the criteria under each principle or not. So that follows each principle. If you look at the structure of the template, you see that there's 3 columns. The first one is the actual principles, and under each principles, the requirements that are included as part of fulfilling the requirements of the principles. The second column is banks' responses. So this is where you're expected to provide statements that address the requirements in the first column. And in some cases, those fields are highlighted in yellow. So Simone, if you scroll down just to show what this looks like to impact analysis. So this is an area where we expect banks to cover in the scope of limited assurance. So the second column, or the bank's response or statements, should be covered in the scope of limited assurance. Practically, you can carve this out in agreements with your assurance provider. You can include it in an appendix of an existing sustainability report or an annual report. You could even include the whole table in an assured document if that's what you wish. The requirement is to have that second column in the areas highlighted in scope of limited assurance. And the third column is for you to provide links to the public domain where stakeholders can find more information as to how you're addressing the requirements under the principles. So the second column, of course, cannot fit a full response with all of the details. So that is why we expect banks in the second column to summarize how they address the requirement, but actually give links to the detailed information in the third column. Maybe Simone, we can open to. Oh yeah, this is what Simone is showing now on the screen. In gray is the area where banks are expected to provide a statement on fulfilling the principles. So you're expected to say yes or no, are you fulfilling the requirements under this principle? This is not covered by assurance, as you can see. The statements made per requirement are covered by assurance. I think we can open to questions, Simone.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Rado. So I'm giving this now to the audience, to the floor here. We've heard the full framework now with the most detail, of course, now with the reporting and self-assessment template. So once again, this is something you start filling in within 18 months. Of course, in the beginning, it's maybe not, you're maybe not able to provide all information yet, but that's fine. You have up to 4 years to put everything in place. You provide a high-level summary and then references links to the relevant information. And for key areas, your response needs to be assured, and you need to let us know in a public statement if you fulfill the requirements or not. So hopefully fairly straightforward. With that, we have received a couple of questions. So let me go into that. As collective questions in the region, please respond to the following 3 questions. Greatly appreciate if you could respond yes or no. Okay, we will try. Question number 1 here. Reporting and self-assessment template does not have to be complete in the first 4 years, but the template itself needs to be public from the first reporting. Yes, no. So from the Secretariat side, a quick yes, that is correct. But I don't know if our 3 core group banks want to add any detail here. Dimitrios, Natalie, Rado. So once again, reporting and self-assessment template, it doesn't have to be fully complete in the first 4 years, but it does need to be published from starting 18 months, and then every year it can get better and completer until year 4. I don't know if you guys have anything to add there or any practical experience you want to share there.
Maybe I can start. So yeah, the answer is yes, but I think it's really important to note here that, well, externally, in order to ensure that the framework, the initiative is seen as credible, and also we address many concerns about the banking industry not being transparent enough. I think it's important to be open about the areas where you still need to improve, and you actually increase credibility or the perception of credibility if you're more open and transparent about what you still need to do in order to get there. Internally, from our own experience, at least at ING, reporting really helps to drive progress by identifying areas for improvement, by identifying next steps. It's easier to get this on the board agenda, on senior management's agenda, if it's really out there, and if it's identified as a clear next step or as a clear gap. So I do believe that reporting helps drive progress.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Rado. Very true. Dimitrios, Natalie, any additions from your side to this question?
Simon,
No.
I just wanted to add to what Rado just said, and I agree that reporting is also a stimulant to make things work forward. But I also like to say that, and this is from our experience, that reporting also brings together the various functions within a bank, the various divisions that normally do not talk to each other. So it is very, very important that through reporting you build this kind of teamwork and understanding, and that will help very much in implementing the principles, because as we said before, the principles do touch upon all functions within a bank, and it's very important that you create the right culture within the bank to be able to be as more successful as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dimitrios. Very practical insight. Natalie, I don't know, you sounded like you had a couple things to add from your side as well?
No, nothing to add.
Okay, fantastic. Then let's do the second question here. Assurance is good to have, but not a must in the first 4 years. So quick response from the Secretariat. Yes, it's true. Assurance is absolutely required after 4 years, because that is the time when you have to have everything in place. Before that, it would be very good to have it for credibility purposes, but it is not an absolute must. If a bank gives its first reporting without assurance, that will be accepted. Giving back to Rado, Dimitrios, Natalie, any additions there from your side, any comments you want to make?
Natalie speaking. On our side, the idea will probably be to add desk reporting in our existing reporting, which is already revised. So perhaps during the first year, everything will not be set and everything will not be in the reporting. But from our side, the idea will really try to implement step by step and use everything we have, which can answer the principle and which is already revised to make the link.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So very, very practical and easy, no, Natalie?
Simone, can I add something as well?
Absolutely, come in, Dimitri.
Yeah, I agree with what Natalie said. It is very important that you start acquiring experience. So it is. I would suggest that you start doing from year 1, if possible. Waiting until year 4, you might be surprised, and you might have problems trying to get, what you should be getting assured. So I suggest that we start step by step. Year 1, we do a few things. Step 2, and next year a few more, until by the end of year 4 we're fully well prepared to do a proper assurance for all the aspects of the principles.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dimitri. Rado, yeah,
if I can add to that. All valid points, and maybe an additional point is that assurance can really help your case internally. Quite often, assurance providers challenge you when you make statements, so they want to see what these statements are based on. So on the one hand side, they can really help you improve the process and identify real gaps. On the other hand side, I think it's a way to manage senior management, for example, editing parts of the disclosure, or maybe making things sound a bit better than they actually are. I think assurance providers can help you get a more realistic idea of where you stand.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rado. Thank you very much to all three of you. And then we have the third question from the same person here, and it is about the assurance provider. If there are criteria or specific definitions, or if there is guidance for assurance providers. In my very limited understanding, assurance providers do have to have a license to call themselves assurance providers. So there should be a very clear case for who banks can use. But Rado, you are our assurance expert, so I'll let you maybe come in here.
Yeah, they should be. There should be certified or licensed assurance providers. Maybe there's regional differences. In the Netherlands, there's a national assurance organization, and assurance providers are members of that. So I think there's a similar body in every country.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Natalie, Dimitrios, anything from your side to add on that?
Not really. I think that Rado said it really nice and clear.
Okay. Fantastic.
And for me.
Okay, perfect. Then to the person who has submitted these questions, if you just let me know real quick in the questions pane if your questions were sufficiently answered, if it's all clear to you, or if you have follow-up questions or feel some things haven't been fully addressed, just give us a quick feedback. Yeah, that would be great. Let me move on to a few more questions we have. Regarding the highlighted items, should we disclose within 18 months? Thanks very much for that question. So I think from our perspective, you should try to disclose as much as possible on everything, and where you can't disclose, just state that this information is not available yet for specific reasons. But I will give over to our banks here for answering that. Maybe Rado, we start with you, since reporting is your specialty here. So regarding the highlighted items, should we disclose within 18 months? And I guess we can extend that to all items in the template as well.
Well, I think it's more or less the same question as the first question. Do you have to report? Well, the answer is no, you don't have to, but ideally, for the reasons that we just outlined, it makes sense. It will make your life easier. It'll help you address the reporting requirements by the deadline of 4 years. So I think it makes sense to start early on in the first year, also because this is how you identify gaps and this is how you prioritize future work.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rado. Any additions, Dimitrios and Nathalie, from your side?
Well, Simon, again, when Rado speaks, there's very little that I can add to what he says. But, I would just second that, yes, it is very important that we start from day one. Start working on reporting and how to report. Reporting actually helps you in many ways to identify where you are weak, where you are strong, and where you have to put more emphasis and more and more effort. So I suggest that it's very important that we start reporting. It's also very important that our assurers become educated and trained in what they should be looking at. I mean, the template is a general template. It will help in many ways. But at the same time, because the principles are new and what we're trying to do here is quite new, it's not exactly the way that, assurers work. They have their little boxes and they tick. They have to really get into and understand the spirit of the principles. So I think it's a two-way thing. We have to learn through reporting, and our assurers and the third party, whatever, reviewers will have to become trained and educated in looking at this new way that the principles introduce in the world of banking.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Dimitrios. I will move to the next question because we have a few more to get through. What should the first reporting after signing the PRB definitely include? I think it's a question that goes very much in the same direction. So maybe, Nathalie, we start with you on this one.
I get the official answer should be depends, so I can probably share what we think our reporting would look like. For us, the idea is really to work on the impact assessment, really define where are the areas we want to set targets. So this is not an official recommendation or anything, but it is more the idea that for us, one of the things which is really new or important in the principle is assess where your impact are and then define your target. So I guess probably in the first year, for a bank which has not done any impact assessment or materiality assessment, this would be a good first step.
Okay, thanks very much, Nathalie. Rado, what should the first reporting after signing the PRB definitely include?
Well, I agree with Nathalie. The impact analysis is really the foundation of the reporting work. So making sure that you conduct a proper impact analysis, looking at both positive and negative impacts, looking at actual impacts and opportunities for impact, addressing the other elements like significance or salience that are described in the template. I think this is the first and most important piece of the work.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks a lot. Once again, also to those who asked the last two questions, if you just write back to us real quick, letting us know if you feel your questions have been fully answered or if you have follow-ups. I have one more here, just to be sure. With regards to the first reporting and self-assessment on principles, which is needed to be reported within latest 18 months after signing, Should we prepare a separate report for one time only respecting your template, or can we also include the first reporting framework in our existing reporting as you mentioned, such as annual integrated reports? I'll stop here because it's actually two questions in one. So quick answer here would be there needs to be no extra report, but what you've seen here should be included in your existing reporting, would be my quick answer. But once again, giving to the three banks, maybe Dimitrios, we start with you here.
Simon, I agree with you. We have to include it in our existing reporting sustainability reports or annual reports or whatever, and we just have to make very clear to reference, where that information can be found. So there is no need to create any other standalone reports.
Okay, fantastic, Dimitrios. Rado and Natalie, anything from your side to add?
No, I guess from my side, the idea would be to make to use the template to check that we're not missing anything, and to make the reference to where in our integrated report answers can be found.
Okay, thanks a lot, Natalie. Rado, anything from your side?
Same, I agree. It should be in existing reports. We'll probably also make use of our website. In making progress in aligning with the principles, we may change some disclosures on our website or our annual report, but the references will be in the template, so we're not planning to issue a new report. We'll probably have, for communications purposes, somewhere on our website, a micro page or like a link that describes the fact that we're now signatories and pointing to the template.
Okay, perfect, Rado. Okay, so you can see the banks that have been involved in this for over a year now. They already have some very practical ideas for how they will be doing this. I hope that was helpful to you. Do let us know in the questions box if you have follow-up questions on that. Yet a second question here. Will there be any advisory guidance or specific tool for understanding how to assess impact as well as targets against impacts? Absolutely. Part of becoming a signatory to the principles and a UNEP-FI member is joining this community that works together to implement the principles. And they have already started several months ago to work on impact analysis, and we will be, in fact, in September, together with the final launch of the principles, publishing some guidance and some approaches that the banks have developed together on impact analysis. They're, of course, not mandatory, but it is one approach that you might want to use or look at. Similar for target setting, we have various working groups, communities of practice. There are several banks that work together on setting targets on climate. So if you join, if you become a signatory, there's plenty of access to peer learning, to working groups, to guidance, etc. Because all banks are in the same boat and will need to do this. I'll stop here maybe. I don't know if our banks have anything to add here.
Simone, I love that question because it was something I wanted to share, and this is the importance of peer learning, the importance of exchanging information and experience in being a member of a community, because we are embarking on a journey that no bank has really or some banks sort of have started a little bit earlier than other banks, but no bank has really all the answers to the questions and the challenges that we'll be facing. But all the banks working together can possibly find good solutions, good answers to the questions that will arise. So we will be developing tools along the way. The impact assessment tool, which we've been working on, is a very good sign of what, the benefits that we can gain from working and being together. So I strongly urge the banks to join these principles, be part of the community, and benefit from sharing information.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dimitrios. I have another question here, and this is the last one we will treat. Apologies to those who have put in more questions, but otherwise we'll go a bit over time, but we'll answer your question in writing after the call, so don't worry, it doesn't get lost. But there's one more I think we should look at. It's could you repeat the details we have to complete in the second column? So Rado, I think that refers to the reporting and self-assessment template. So I'm reopening that. Can you explain one more time what needs to go into the second column?
Sure. The second column should include, per requirement, a high-level statement, so your own statement, made in response to the sentences that are actually the principal's requirements. So you see 1.1, for example, says describe, high level, your bank's business model, including the main customer segments served, types of products and services, main sectors, types of activities, and where relevant, the technology finance across the main geographies in which your bank has operations or provides products and services. So in the second column, you're expected to list those types of products, those segments that you serve. For example, for ING, we would list retail banking, wholesale banking, and those are only two segments. In terms of business model, we'll just explain a couple of things and then refer actually in the third column to our website, a few places in our website where we describe our strategy, we describe our business model. There's another part where we talk about our business segments like retail and wholesale. So the details should be in those public links that you include in the third column, while the second column, in just a couple of sentences, should summarize that.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rado. Maria Eugenia, I hope that was helpful to you and also to others. So really, in the second column, you provide an answer or you provide a response to what you're asked for in the first column, but it should really just be a summary. And then the more details can be available in your reporting on your website, and you just provide references and links to that. With that, we will end the Q&A session to give us a little bit of time to talk about next steps, because this will be quite important for all of you. We hope that all of you will become founding signatories of the Principles for Responsible Banking. In order for that to happen, we would need for your bank to sign the principles by 22nd of August. That's not very far away, just about a month from now. So that on 22nd September, a month later, you can be one of the founding signatories of the Principles for Responsible Banking, can be part of the global launch, etc. It's very easy. You sign the Principles for Responsible Banking signing document. We will also recirculate that in the follow-up. It's linked here in the slides as well. If you're not already a member, many of you are, then you join UNEP-FI, and we publicly announce that you've joined. So very easy process. In addition to the 30 core group banks, the banks you see here have already committed to becoming a signatory. In total, it's 72 banks at the moment. We're hoping that by September will be around 100 banks that together will be the founding signatories of the Principles for Responsible Banking. So make sure you're one of them. And that will be then the big moments on 22nd and 23rd September. So the official signing and launch of the Principles for Responsible Banking will take place at United Nations headquarters on 22nd September 2019. That is not a random date. That is the start of the United Nations General Assembly. So the one moment every year when all 193 heads of states are coming together to discuss the most pressing global challenges, to discuss how to achieve global objectives. And so this year, this will also be the moment when bank CEOs from around the world, through signing the Principles for Responsible Banking, will commit to playing a crucial role in tackling these challenges and achieving these objectives and contributing to our joint sustainable future. We already have 42 bank CEOs from around the world confirmed to attend in person. It would be fantastic to have your CEO there as well, even if your CEO can't participate in person. This is a global launch event, so we'll make absolutely sure all banks and all bank CEOs are featured and included in the global communication. The 22nd will be a small private event at United Nations headquarters in terms of participants, of course, with lots of media going out. The day after, on 23rd September, is when we'll have the industry launch, so a big event hosted at BNP Paribas. And there will be speaking opportunities for all CEOs during the morning session. So the morning will be very high level. And then in the afternoon, we'll drill down, we'll focus on implementation with discussions and speakers at practitioner level. So that's really going to be quite interesting, I'm sure, for all of you. So you can register here. And for more details for your CEOs, we also have a CEO guide to the events on 22nd, 23rd September. You find the link here, so you can share that with your CEOs' teams. With that, from our side, a big thank you to all of you for joining. And we're asking for a favor. I know there are many banks in this webinar that are in the process of getting sign-off to join the principles. If you haven't done so yet, please let us know that you are in the process. So we have an overview of what banks are still in the process. Maybe your process will get delayed, you'll have problems with the deadline, etc. Just let us know. So if you're thinking of becoming a founding signatory, then just make sure you're in touch with us and we'll guide you through the process together, and we'll make sure that it'll happen and that you will be a founding signatory. With that, a big thank you to our speakers, Dimitrios from Piraeus, Natalie from BNP, and Rado from ING. As I said, the remaining questions we'll answer in writing, and a recording of this webinar will also be provided to all UNEP-FI members. So if you have colleagues that want to look at this later, absolutely no problem. With that, have a fantastic day or evening, depending on where you are. And again, thank you very much to everybody. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.